Hello, 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 and welcome to English Learning for Curious Minds by Leonardo English, the show where you can listen to fascinating stories and learn weird and wonderful things about the world at the same time as improving your English. I'm Alistair Budge, and today we are going to be talking about one of the most famous and controversial psychological experiments of all time, the Stanford Prison Experiment. To some observers, it was seen as yet more proof of how otherwise law-abiding, normal humans can do horrific things to each other. So, in this episode, we'll talk about the purpose of the experiment, what actually happened, what it tells us about human psychology, and why its greatest critics think it doesn't really tell us that much at all. Okay then, let's get right into it and talk about the Stanford Prison Experiment. An unfortunate truth about humanity is that we humans are capable of committing acts against our fellow humans that are utterly inhumane. Men and women who might otherwise live normal, kind lives, under certain conditions, sometimes do horrific things. Unfortunately, we have tens of thousands of years of human history that shows this to be true. It is still the case today, and no doubt it will still be the case in thousands of years to come. But why? What is it about certain situations that can change a person's behaviour? Can otherwise normal, rational people be turned into monsters if placed in particular circumstances? In August of 1971, a Stanford professor named Philip Zimbardo sought to answer this question. He put out an advertisement in the local newspaper, which read,
"Male college students needed for psychological study of prison life. $15 per day for 1 to 2 weeks, beginning August 14th. For further information and applications, come to room 248, Jordan Hall, Stanford University."
Slightly ominous, male college students needed for psychological study of prison life. $15 per day for 1 to 2 weeks. Now, $15 in 1971 is around $110 in today's money. Not a colossal amount of money, by Californian standards at least, but enough to attract a few university students to participate in a psychological study of prison life. 75 students applied. They were interviewed, screened to check that they didn't have any serious medical problems, any psychological conditions, or a criminal record. In other words, they needed to be regular university students. The group was whittled down to 24 participants, who were split into 2 groups. Half were randomly assigned to be guards, and half were assigned to be prisoners. These 24 young men, all considered to be healthy, well-adjusted, and average in almost every way, were ready to begin the experiment. The guards were asked to report to Stanford University on the first day of the experiment to begin their training and orientation. They were given uniforms, batons, and reflective sunglasses to wear, along with the instructions on their role, to maintain order in the prison. The prisoners, however, were told to wait at home for further instructions. What they didn't know was that their participation would begin with a surprise arrest. Without any warning, real police officers, yes, actual police officers, showed up at their homes. They were arrested, handcuffed, and taken to a police station. There, they were fingerprinted, photographed, and charged with offences like armed robbery. Of course, the charges weren't real, and the participants knew they were part of an experiment. But the realistic nature of the arrest was designed to make them feel as though they had truly lost their freedom. After this mock arrest process, the prisoners were blindfolded and transported to the basement of Stanford University's psychology building, which had been transformed into a makeshift prison. When they arrived, their blindfolds were removed, and they were made to strip down, sprayed with what was described as a delousing spray, and given prison uniforms to wear. The uniforms were simple, but designed to be humiliating. Prisoners wore smocks, which were like long, shapeless dresses, and on their heads they had to wear a nylon stocking cap. Around their ankles they had chains that rattled as they walked, a constant reminder of their lack of freedom. Each prisoner was assigned a number, which was sewn onto their uniform. From that point on, they were no longer addressed by their names, but only by their numbers. This was all intentional. The idea was to make them feel like they had lost their identity and their individuality. Now, on the other side of this prison were the guards. The guards were dressed in khaki uniforms. They had reflective sunglasses to make eye contact impossible, and were carrying batons, though they were told not to use them for physical punishment. The guards had been given a very simple instruction: maintain order in the prison. Beyond that, they were largely left to figure things out for themselves. And at first, things were relatively calm. The prisoners followed the guards' instructions. The guards kept watch, and Zimbardo and his team observed everything from behind hidden cameras and microphones. But it didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. On just the second day, the prisoners rebelled. They tore off their numbers, refused to leave their cells, and shouted at the guards. The guards, who had been unsure of their authority at first, suddenly became much more aggressive. They used fire extinguishers to force prisoners back into their cells. They stripped some prisoners naked as a form of humiliation. And they began to enforce strict rules that seemed to come out of nowhere. For example, prisoners were only allowed to go to the toilet at certain times. If they broke the rules or annoyed the guards, they were punished. Some were forced to do physical exercises like push-ups. Others were put into solitary confinement, a tiny, dark closet that could barely fit one person. And as the days went on, the punishments became more creative and cruel. One guard made prisoners clean the toilets with their bare hands. Another forced them to simulate sexual acts as a way of degrading them. What was shocking is that none of this was planned. The guards came up with these punishments on their own, as if the power they had been given unleashed something darker inside them. As for the prisoners, they quickly fell into the roles that had been assigned to them. Some became passive, obeying every command without question. Others broke down emotionally, crying and screaming to be let out. One prisoner, referred to only as prisoner 8612, began to have what seemed like a complete mental breakdown after just 36 hours. He screamed at the guards, yelled that he wanted to leave, and even told Zimbardo that he felt like he was losing his mind. Instead of ending the experiment, Zimbardo initially tried to convince him to stay, saying that leaving would disappoint the others. But eventually, prisoner 8612 was allowed to go. After prisoner 8612 was released,